Does it ever just feel like there's way too many movies coming out and there's a lot of movies that you're like, oh, I actually plan on seeing? Well, here's the thing. I do that. I actually see every movie I want to see. I try and go out and I see the movies that I had a desire to. And in many cases, I even go out and see the movies that I don't care about. I try to see everything. That's what makes me who I am as a movie reviewer and movie critic. When I decided to start taking this seriously, I'm like, I am going to commit to seeing basically everything that is released in a calendar year. I'm currently at about 75, maybe 80 films up through, I guess it'd be May. And today I just wanted to kind of do a compilation. These were 10 films that I watched either in April or May. I'm calling this a May wrap-up. But these are 10 movies that I watched that I haven't yet reviewed on this channel that I want to take the time and review today. So, my name is Ben Friedman. For those who do not know me, I am a film critic with such associations as Highbrow Magazine. And today, I'm reviewing 10 movies. Count that, 10 movies here on this channel. I'm not going to go into great detail about all of these movies because some of them, in some cases, do not warrant great detail. But what I do want to talk about is what is successful and what is not successful about these movies. And I also want to really focus on why that is. So that's what we're going to be focusing. I have movies that I hated. I have movies that I liked. I had movies that I was indifferent to. And I had movies that I loved on this list. And let's start with the love, because that's a fun way to start. And it's also one of the most popular movies of the year. I kind of can't believe I forgot to do a review on this movie, but I looked through the channel and like, I never actually reviewed this movie. So we're reviewing it today, and that is the action sensation film that is this franchise that basically reinvigorates Keanu Reeves as an action star. This film in particular stars Keanu Reeves, but also includes Donnie Yen, Ian McShane, Lawrence Fishburne, reuniting him with Keanu, the Matrix duo, Scott Adkins, Shamar Anderson as Mr. Nobody, is really good in this film. Bill Skarsgård is a new addition. For those who, let me say this movie title. For those who don't know what movie I'm referring to, it's John Wick Chapter 4, directed by Chad Stahelski, I believe is how you pronounce his name. Let me give you a brief synopsis for John Wick, as if it even matters. In this film, as the bounty continues to grow on John Wick's head, he sets out to get revenge on the High Table and those who left him for dead in the previous movie. This is the fourth installment in this film. This has kind of been described as the conclusion of this John Wick story as we know it. They've been a little coy on whether this will be the actual end of this franchise or if this is just the last appearance we'll see of Keanu, or if we're going to get John Wick Chapter 5. That's all kind of left in the air. But for the story laid out in John Wick Chapter 1, him going up against the people who killed his dog, and then him going up against the High Council, and then him being punished, all that. This is the, for lack of a better word, definitive conclusion of this story. And here's what I have to just go out right away and just praise of this movie, is the action in I was about to say Top Gun because that's another really well-directed action movie. The action in John Wick Chapter 4 is top-notch. This is maybe the best hand-to-hand combat I've ever just seen on screen. I actually couldn't believe what I was watching. This is so impressive, and it's so fluid, and it's captured kind of so brilliantly by Stahelski at the helm. So many action films, like while they might have some good cinematography, they're kind of ruined by camera work where it's just hard to follow what the action is happening on screen. This film's not that. This film is the case of, I am totally able to understand the visual language of which this action is filmed in. It is so easy to follow, and thus the story is easy to follow. And it's so painstakingly difficult watching this action to just imagine how this director captured it. The cinematography in this film is legitimately wonderful. This is one of the most beautiful looking films that I have seen. This last hour in particular is just a sequence of just brilliance. I mean, just this last hour of cinematography on display. It's just so incredible to watch. In particular, if you've seen the movie, you'll know this shot that I'm referring to. But there's a certain scene where John Wick gets a shotgun slash flamethrower weapon, and the camera turns to a bird's eye view, and it's like looking down at the action, and it kind of is modeled after this video game, which I'm blanking on the name of the video game. But it's such a cool effect because it blends this feeling of modern action, old school action. Like it very much gave like a really like it used the effects of Matrix, what made Matrix so special, which makes sense because Chad Stahelski, again, sorry I'm mispronouncing his name, but he was one of the stunt coordinators on the Matrix. So it has this fluidity nature that was kind of made famous by the Matrix. So it adds so that, lends this film cinematic qualities. But like this bird eye view, it kind of makes it feel like a video game. And in doing so, it just makes everything that much more interesting to look at, because this is a 3-hour movie of action. And that sounds like it should get repetitive, but it never actually does get repetitive because each scene is just done with such a different style and feel. The next sequence following this bird's eye view is this sequence that involves John Wick trying to get up a flight of stairs. And it's kind of comedy done to perfect effect. It is such a funny, but also such a noteworthy action scene in the movie. And it's just this moment where it, again, allows you to kind of just feel John Wick getting pushed down and him keep ascending. But it's also done to pretty wonderful comedic effect. And it's, like I said, this whole last hour is building up upon itself, where like John Wick, the whole point of this last hour in particular, and I'm focusing on this last hour, not because the rest of the movie isn't good, but it's because this last hour is kind of a perfect summation of what the director does so well and what this production team does so well in John Wick Chapter 4, is John Wick is trying to get to a destination, and meanwhile, everyone in the city is trying to kill him. And the scene starts off, John Wick is literally coming from the ground up. I mean, he is in the, I'm trying to think if the subway station of this city, and he ascends up, kind of, you get this imagery. It's almost like the devil ascending from hell to exact his revenge. And there's this car chase that follows, followed by the staircase sequence that I mentioned. And it's just kind of just incredible to look at. This car chase sequence in particular is like one of the best film stunts I've ever seen. I can't even imagine how hard that was to film. And the camera is doing about 1,000 things at once that just make this film so interesting to look at. It is such an engaging film with the way it uses colors, with the way it uses lighting, with the way it even decides to tell its story. It is just so, the story should be conventional, and yet it feels so fresh because we've never seen action filmed like this. And it makes this 3-hour, it makes this 3-hour long runtime just fly by. And here's the thing. This movie does feel like 3 hours, but I could have kept watching it. I feel the length of the movie, but I didn't want the movie to stop. And that's a testament to the quality of filmmaking that is in John Wick Chapter 4. For what this film is, it's kind of a masterpiece. Like, I mean, legitimately one of the best action films you will ever see put to screen. John Wick is really strong as the protagonist. Keanu Reeves is very strong as the protagonist. That's what I meant to say. It is all around, just like I said, a very impressive directorial feature, production design. This is this genre, this action movie, this revenge thriller, just done to the utmost. And most movies would take easy shortcuts, and that's never what this movie's interested in. It is really interested in, can we deliver high-octane action, just filmed to perfection? And that's what John Wick Chapter 4 achieves. I was really impressed with this film. I really love this film. I think it's, if not the best John Wick film, then it's definitely the second best John Wick film. This is a huge recommendation for me. 4.5 out of 5 stars for me. So that is my review of John Wick Chapter 4. And let's now jump into another action movie that actually is very similar to what works about John Wick. And it is a film that is also trying to model in on the success of John Wick. And I think it does so to varying degrees. And this film is called Sisu. This is directed by Jomari Helander. This is, I want to say it is a Swedish film. Maybe it's Norway. But let me describe the plot. Deep into the wilderness of Lapland, a gold miner hits it rich only to stumble upon Nazis. Unfortunately for this Nazis, this gold miner has a few tricks up his sleeve. This is an action filler. This is an action film about a man with a dark past who's killed people, and now Nazis are trying to kill him, and he's going to kill all of them. And what works best about Sisu is that premise of a man brutally killing Nazis. If you're going to have an action film and you need to kind of horrifically kill people, human beings, make them Nazis. And it works to varying degrees of success throughout this film. And when I say varying, it's because this film is a little uneven at times. It has a tonal issue where sometimes it's a little bit too comedic. It's a bit too ridiculous. The character, the protagonist that we're following, he has too much plot armor where you just have to go with it. You just have to accept that this guy is kind of this immortal thing. He can't die even though he feels vulnerable, but he never actually shows any real signs of weakness. So you're left to believe that every time he gets hurt that you're supposed to feel his pain, but you also know he's going to get up. And that kind of adds this weird reaction when watching the movie because it has this weird like sense of fantasy mixed with trying to be a modern action movie like John Wick. The thing that works so well about John Wick is when Keanu Reeves breaks a bone in John Wick, you feel John Wick weaken the rest of the movie. When the character, the protagonist, I should say, of Sisu breaks a bone or anything like that, it kind of just feels like he moves right past it and there's no actual lasting impact on that. But the kills themselves are really entertaining. The film struggles to differentiate these kills where I do, when going back and thinking about this movie, I am left thinking like, you know what, that's kind of feels like the same kill from earlier. They all kind of just start blending together and it starts feeling weird for this to separate itself. So when I'm thinking back on this movie, I'm thinking this all just kind of blends together. And that's not necessarily in a bad way, but it does make it a little less memorable. Sisu has a very popish feel to it. I would compare this, and I hate using comparisons, but I think this is probably a pretty apt comparison, is similar to the style of Robert Rodriguez or Quentin Tarantino. Title card / chapters literally, like quite literally appear on the screen. And it kind of makes it feel like a cartoon. It has this almost Looney Tunes-like energy to it when the title cards pop up, when we have these ridiculous kills, ridiculous explosions, all that. It feels very silly, but the actors all take the material deadly seriously. The actor who plays Sisu in particular, who I wish I had his name right here, and his name's actually Sisu. I believe it's actually Corpy. Sisu is a term kind of like the Baba Yaga in John Wick. It just basically means a killer. Something that cannot die, I think is described. But while the actors are taking this deadly seriously, it does again kind of create this tonal issue with it, where you're just kind of left thinking, where it's just like, this is too silly and yet it's too self-serious, and it just kind of lends itself to be somewhere in the middle. At times, this movie really reminded me of Jason Statham in the film Crank. And then at other times, this feels as deadly serious as a John Wick. And that tone doesn't mesh together perfectly at times. And it's an inexperienced director, and you can feel an inexperienced director at the helm. But what Helander, who is the director of this film, does really well is he utilizes this trick where we, of the audience, just kind of get to see what is coming in this movie. He's a very good visual cues director. kind of the Chekhov's gun. There's certain weapons in this movie that are laid out, and you just know the character of Corpy will get his hands on it. And that's where the excitement is built up. Also, at like less than 90 minutes, this film just is in and out. Like I said, what the film does struggle with, though, is while that natural progression can be fun, some of it does feel very redundant and repetitive. And Helander has a really good eye for violence, but it's very sometimes not interesting. There's a few visceral kills, and then there's a lot of just really bloody kills that I kind of just don't have memory of. I can picture like the gun wounds going through, but they're not done in any particular interesting way. There doesn't feel like an impact. They're not cartoonish. They're just kind of there. And so again, it's this critique of an inexperienced director trying to accomplish something that he does, again, to largely successful degrees. But when this movie is so reliant on the action, because the character of Corpy barely speaks, it's almost a largely silent film for a majority of the time. When the action falls flat, the film can feel really flat. And in some cases, involving like bigger set pieces, like there's a set piece involving a tank, you can really feel the limitations of him as a director and also the limitations of a budget. And the film becomes static and thus loses some of that goodwill it has going on. There's also this subplot involving women, which I don't want to get too much into it, but it really does just empower the male revenge fantasy in a way that I just found a little bit more icky than, helpful? I don't know if that's the correct word, but I think it was supposed to be empowering, and I found it to be a little bit on the nose. And I felt like these characters weren't actually real characters. Now, this is not, again, while I did criticize this movie a fair amount, I think this film is worth your time. At like 85-minute runtime, if you are a fan of this type of movie, of this revenge thriller, of one man versus an army, it has that old school 80s throwback feel. And while it's not quite as successful as other films in this same genre, especially the film that I just reviewed in John Wick, it certainly has enough energy to it that I was left invested and I had a good time watching this movie, even if I can see some inherent flaws in the filmmaking. I'm giving Sisu 3.5 out of 5 stars. And speaking, I don't know how to transition. I was going to try transitioning out and be smooth, but I don't have a transition for this one. So we're just going to jump into this. I saw right after Sisu, I think literally the next day, I saw this movie that had actually come out in April. I didn't get to see it in theaters. I don't know if it was more of the case of me just kind of forgetting that it was out in theaters, having a lack of interest of it being out in theaters or whatever, but I waited to see it on streaming. I got to see it middle of May, I think. This film is called Renfield, directed by Chris McKay. Chris McKay, a guy that I really like. He directed the Lego Batman movie, a movie that I find quite delightful. Renfield stars Nicholas Holtz, Nicolas Cage, Awkwafina, and Ben Schwartz. And the premise of Renfield is, tired of being Dracula's henchman and punching bag, Renfield decides it is time to stand up to his abusive boss. However, when your boss is Dracula, leaving is a much easier said thing than actually done. And let's get into this movie, because there's one reason that this movie has fun in it. And that reason is Nick Cage. Nicolas Cage is literally in National Treasures and a national treasure. He is having a ball in this movie. And you can just feel him embracing this source material. This is a guy who loves this type of movie. He loves the old school 1930s Universal monster movies. So for him, getting to play Dracula is kind of a dream come true. And that energy is emitted through the screen. You can really feel Nick Cage's enthusiasm playing the iconic Dracula, and he's really going for it, and it's really funny throughout. This isn't a case of Nick Cage being so crazy that we're all laughing, but we're laughing at him. This is the case of Nick Cage completely understanding the tone of this film, and he's in on the joke. It's a very great performance from him. He's having a ball in this film. Like I said, he is just so perfectly cast as this character of Dracula, as is Renfield. Nicholas Hoult, who is an actor who I wouldn't necessarily think of him to be a guy to lead the film as he is asked to do in this film, but he does an admirable enough job. He has good chemistry with the cast, and especially his scenes with Nicolas Cage are the best. Everything revolving around Renfield, Dracula, this whole group meeting and this, throwing around terms like gaslighting or abusive work relationships, that all really works to wonderful effects. When this is a workplace comedy, Renfield really succeeds to wonderful effects. The issue is this is not a workplace comedy. This is kind of a crime movie, a crime comedy. Ben Schwartz, who voices Sonic the Hedgehog, he is a gangster. I think he's like the mob head. And his storyline really feels like it is there to add action scenes. And thus, when you have action scenes, then you can have Dracula biting people and blood everywhere. And it is in here for action's sake. You don't actually feel like this storyline has any real impact. That's the same with Awkwafina, who plays a cop that Renfield ends up like having a crush on. She's again there to kind of add this romantic relationship, add to the action sequences. And it doesn't really work in any particular meaningful way. When the film focuses in on Nick Cage and Nicholas Hoult, this movie is a ton of fun. The issue is the film doesn't focus in on itself enough. It focuses much more broadly. It's trying to be an action comedy. It's trying to be a crime movie. It's trying to be a workplace comedy. It's trying to be a broad comedy. It also at just times just goes straight for horror. There's too much going on within Renfield to satisfy any one of those things. Thus, all of these ideas and story beats feel undercooked, which is a disappointment because, like I said, Nick Cage was born for this role, and I wish the rest of the film lived up to him. It is the case of Renfield is a funny idea with lackluster execution. Thus, I can't get it a fresh review. I cannot get it to 3 stars. It's falling right below at 2.5 out of 5 stars. I definitely enjoyed watching this movie just solely based on the Nicolas Cage dynamic and how he interacts with everyone else in this film. He is so strong that he is able to pick up the weak aspects, but to actually get the movie to a good movie, even his talent is not able to reach greatness in this movie as it needs to. Thus, Renfield is a 2.5 out of 5 star movie. Check out this transaction. I messed that up. I was supposed to say, check out this transition, but I messed up the transition and said transaction. Screw me. This is another horror movie. I'm done. I'm pissed with this transition that I messed up, and now I'm just going to read it straight. The Pope's Exorcist. Directed by Julius Avery. This is directed by the guy who did Overlord and Samaritan. Overlord from 2018 was an actually pretty good zombie World War II movie. Samaritan was a really bad Sly Stallone action Amazon Prime movie. This has Russell Crowe. And the same ways that I just talked about the movies Renfield, which if you're watching these videos separately, check out my review of Renfield. But the way that I just talked about Nicolas Cage's performance in Renfield being able to lift up a lot of the weaker elements of Renfield, the character that Russell Crowe plays in here, the Father Amor, the chief exorcist of the Vatican, he is the reason you watch this movie. Russell Crowe is a very charismatic actor, and he's having a just kind of just ball with this movie. I mean, just straight up, I don't even know if this performance is competent because I'm not positive Russell Crowe understands what movie he is, or if it's the case that the directors don't understand what movie he is. Because Russell Crowe in this movie as Amor, he plays this, he's not a boozer, but he is a priest that enjoys his alcohol, that enjoys riding on scooters. He's kind of feels like a bad boy priest, if you will. And The Pope's Exorcist, I should just mention this, it follows Father Amor, chief exorcist of the Vatican, who investigates a young boy's terrifying possession only to uncover a century-old conspiracy the Vatican has tried to keep hidden. the idea of Catholics hiding a conspiracy theory that goes down centuries, that's problematic in itself. But just focusing in on the Pope's Exorcist, this is the most cliched movie I've probably seen this year. Every beat that you think this movie would hit, it hits. All the exorcism beats, all the horror beats, all of that, the possession, the young boy, how he's being done, blah, 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 the Catholic priest, like the Vatican conspiracy theory. You could predict this movie. ChatGPT could write this movie. The only aspect of this movie that works is Russell Crowe. And I mean, it's just because it's so funny to see Russell Crowe as a boozing priest listening to 80s rock music that has enough to, at the very least, keep me watching the movie. It's not good. The Pope's Exorcist is not a good movie. It's actually a pretty bad movie, but it's a pretty bad movie in a pretty fun way. I did like watching this movie. And now it goes on far too long. And when the film really starts getting into the more dramatic nature and moving away from horror, because when it starts focusing in on the conspiracy part of the movie and less on the actual exorcism, this movie becomes a lot more dumb and a lot more boring. And that's where this movie really loses me. But for the first 45 minutes, when you're just following a boozing Russell Crowe, listening to like Aha, I think is one of the bands or something like that, that part of the movie is really good. Not good. It's not a good part of the movie, but that aspect of it is enjoyable enough that I'm able to go on board and at least have some fun with it. It doesn't go anywhere. This movie is just ultimately kind of just a disappointment. Or is it a disappointment if I went in with no expectations? This movie is exactly what I thought, with just a slightly better Russell Crowe performance. He's actually committed to trying in this movie. It just goes nowhere. I'm giving it 1.5 out of 5 stars for The Pope's Exorcist. Ooh, this next movie I have not a lot of thoughts on. This is going to be a really quick review. This is directed by Britt McAdams. The film is called Paint, starring Owen Wilson. And Owen Wilson plays a character named Carl Nargle. He's Vermont's #1 public TV painter until one day a younger artist steals everything and everyone Carl loves. Based on the poster of this movie, you can tell that this is a clear parody of Bob Ross. Bob Ross has become much more popular these past few years, and thus you can feel the filmmakers trying to cash in on the Bob Ross craze. And having Owen Wilson in the costume is funny. And that's about the only thing funny with Paint. Paint is actually about as funny as watching paint dry. There is no humor in this movie. The idea of the movie is simply, let's put Owen Wilson in a Bob Ross costume, and that's it. That was really where the creativity ended with this movie. And like for the first 5 minutes when he's doing the painting, like Bob Ross does it, when he's using the fun little expressions or calling them the happy little trees, I don't think he uses it quite like that, but it's very much clearly a reference to that style of talking that Bob Ross is notorious for. You're like, okay, this is kind of funny. This feels like an SNL joke. Where is the joke going? And the movie doesn't know how to answer that question, and no one really knows how to answer that question, and it just ends up being a 95-minute movie that you're watching, and you're like, what's the point of this movie? Where are the jokes? I don't understand what this movie was even trying to be. It is really the case of there's no script to this movie. There is not one funny idea that this movie has outside of Owen Wilson dressed up like Bob Ross. Everyone in the supporting cast is particularly bad. Stephen Root is the only actor that I found who came to play. He has 1 or 2 funny lines, and that's about it. Michaela Watkins, Wendy McLendon, and that's her name, Wendy McLendon, have really poor chemistry with Owen Wilson. The jokes are just so one note. Basically, here's the joke of the movie. We find out that this guy, Carl Nargle, really can't paint, and he dresses funny. That's about it. So when watching this movie, I was watching it, I'm like, okay, so this is just, it feels a little mean-spirited to Bob Ross, And there's no jokes that make it even fun. So it just feels like you're just insulting a guy, but you don't have jokes to back it up. And I just left this movie like 45 minutes into this movie. I thought it was done. I'm like, okay, finally, we're wrapping up. This movie's going to end. This was not good. This was actually really bad. And it kind of keeps going for another 30 minutes. And you're just like, geez, please end this movie. And I don't know. It has this whimsical feel from it. This screenplay, like it has this almost like naturalistic, soft feel to it. Like it feels like, I'm trying to think of like the most equivalent. It almost has this weird like Napoleon Dynamite energy to it, but without like anything backing it up post that. And thus when watching Pain, I was just bored out of my mind and I wanted this movie to end. It is not successful in any way, should perform. And I don't know if I thought this movie was funny, but I at least thought Owen Wilson in a movie was going to be funnier. And to be honest, it's just a lame performance all around. And there's just nothing of note within Pain. I cannot recommend this movie. Stay away from it. Am I going to do it? I'm not going to quite go as low as I should go on this movie, because there's another movie that I'm about to review that is significantly lower than this. This is getting the 1 star out of 5 stars, though. Pain is not a good movie. This next movie that I'm about to talk about, again, I'm just giving up on the what's it called? I am giving up on the transitions here. This next movie I'm about to talk about was a movie I was actually semi-excited to see last year. It was one of the big Oscar play movies starring a leading man that I've always liked and I've never found has quite gotten the leading role that he is deserving of in, I should say, the prestige drama movies. I think he's a very talented actor, but the projects he picks always just fall short. And it's usually not because of him or his fault. It's the quality of movie. And in this case, it's kind of the same thing. I'm talking, of course, about one of my favorite guys, Hugh Jackman, in the movie The Son. The Son also co-stars Zen McGrath, Vanessa Kirby, Laura Dern, Anthony Hopkins. Florian Zeller directs The Son. This is his follow-up to the film The Father, which I think you would call The Son kind of a spiritual successor to The Father, but it's not like these characters are the same. The Son follows Peter Miller, played by Hugh Jackman, who is a successful lawyer and absentee father whose life is turned upside down when his ex-wife, Kate, played by Laura Dern, arrives at his doorstep and tells him that their son is depressed. Guilty of his negligence, Peter agrees to let his son move in with his new wife, played by Vanessa Kirby, and his infant son. And going into this movie, I didn't watch this again until May. This movie ends up releasing wide beginning of January. This premiered at, I want to say it was Venice last year, September of 2022. Instantly, this movie gets critically reviled. It gets just destroyed by the critics there. And it becomes clear that The Son, which many believe could be maybe even Hugh Jackman's win for Best Actor, an award that he's been nominated a few times for, maybe just once. He's nominated for sure for Les Mis. And I know he's had a few failed botches trying to get nominated. Yeah, I guess he's only been nominated the one time for Les Mis. But many people thought that maybe this was going to be Hugh Jackman's best chance at winning a Best Actor Oscar. And then this film gets critically reviled. It becomes very clear that this is not going to win anything. And it just falls off the face of the earth. And it's not discussed any further in the Oscars race/campaign. And that's kind of the reason I didn't end up going to see this movie, because when I was trying to wrap up my list for 2022, figure out my best, my worst, try to see as many movies as I can, The Son was a harder movie to see, and I just knew it wasn't going to be anything for me. The premise of the movie alone didn't particularly interest me. The only thing that interested me was seeing these actors. And that's why I waited. And then I decided, I think it's available to, I think it's Amazon Prime is where you can stream it right now. And I just decided, let's just go in, let's see what all the hubbub/controversy of this movie is about. And I definitely have some thoughts on this movie, but I do want to say this movie is not without merit. The performance from Hugh Jackman is actually really strong. I think it's a very strong performance, actually, that almost saves the movie. He's very charismatic, but you also feel some of the emptiness, the sadness. He's just a very emotional actor where you can really feel like when he's angry, you feel his anger. When he's sad, you feel it. Like it's not done in a stagey way, because one of the biggest issues with The Son is Florian Zeller is a very stagey director where it feels very theatrical. He fits within the language of Zeller's filmmaking and allows it to feel cinematic and not stagey. And that's where Hugh Jackman really shines, where he's able to make something like a play, this kind of sing lyrics to it, not literal singing in it, but just something that has that kind of feel, and bring it down to earth and focuses this movie in its humanity. And he's really talented at that, and he's really able to succeed as an actor in this. As is Vanessa Kirby, who plays his new wife. She's really strong. She actually might be the best performance in the movie. Her character is so needed because it adds a lot of nuance to the family dynamic. The fact that the son, played by, Zen McGrath, has this weird relationship with her because he sees her as the woman that broke up his parents' marriage. It really adds an emotional complexity to this movie. And that really works to the film's benefits. The moments that are best are when it focuses on Hugh Jackman and Vanessa Kirby and that aspect of the family dynamic. But where the film does not work, and I really don't like criticizing a younger actor, but it is Zen McGrath who plays Nicholas, and he plays it to varying degrees of success. I heard some people call him a terrible performer in this movie. I will not go anywhere near as far. He has some really good scenes in this movie. It's also followed by a lot of just scenes that drag. He at times feels very stagey. He is very loud as an actor. He is very expressive, and he can also just plays flat. He reads flat in this role. And that really hurts the film when you're trying to get this emotionally complex thing, and he's just spouting out lines of like cliched depression ideas or how people understand depression. And that makes the film feel emotionally manipulative to an utmost degree. And it's very obnoxious. And it's very just something. I don't want to spoil this ending, but this ending is something, and it's not something good. It's very stagey. This whole movie is actually very stagey. From the writing, no one talks like this. No one just in a movie talks like this. And especially the kid, he doesn't feel like a teenage kid. It's just all so theatrical. And while some actors like Hugh Jackman and Vanessa Kirby are able to counterbalance this, someone as inexperienced as Zen McGrath is not able to do it. And the direction is just poorly conceived. I mean, it is just the case of Florian Zeller struggles to film something non-theatrical. I think this guy has a theatrical background, and thus it feels very staged. Everything feels very plotted out. There's that plotted out feeling of the movie doesn't make it feel natural, which when you're trying to see the natural struggles of a family, the burdens, the pain that is placed on them, this realness and depression, the stagey elements make this feel like a Lifetime movie. I can't say that The Son is a complete failure, but it is at the very least incompetently made. And when you're a movie about depression and suicidal tendencies and you're incompetently made, it makes the film feel far more offensive and maybe even slightly dangerous. And that's why The Son is a failure overall. I think there is a valiant effort trying to be made, and I think there could have been a good story in this. It's just the case of the sum of the pieces never came together, and it didn't make for anything meaningful. I can't, again, say that I hated this film. There are some scenes that did affect me emotionally, but it is because of the emotional manipulation of the scenes, not because it's a natural reaction for me. I don't know. I had some very mixed feelings watching this movie. Not as bad as some people have said. Nowhere near as good as it should be for the subject material. It's a big no from me. It's a 2-star generously. It is a 2-star movie largely due to the effort of the actors, but it doesn't go anywhere that it should. And now, speaking of actors, let's talk about one of my favorite actresses of the past few years in Florence Pugh. She obviously had a big year last year with the Don't Worry Darling controversy. She is now back in a movie that had its fair share of controversy just due to who the director was and his relationship literally with Florence Pugh. That's Zach Braff. Zach Braff and Florence Pugh dated in real life and then broke up before this movie came out. This film is called A Good Person, which this is the 4th directorial effort by Zach Braff. This film stars his then girlfriend Florence Pugh, Morgan Freeman, Molly Shannon, and Saoirse O'Connor. And this film follows Allison, who is played by Florence Pugh. She has it all. She has a successful career, wonderful friends, and a loving fiance until one day her involvement in a fatal accident takes the life of her fiance and soon-to-be sister-in-law. A year later, Allison finds herself addicted to painkillers and forms a relationship with her would-be father-in-law, played by Morgan Freeman, who helps her find a life worth living. And I'm going to let's go on the quick Zach Braff thing. The guy from Scrubs. I really like Scrubs when I watch Scrubs. And I liked the film that Zach Braff directed, Garden State, when I was 13. I haven't seen it since, so I really can't comment on it, but based on some of the scenes that I have seen since then, I probably am in the initial, I am in the belief that I probably wouldn't like Garden State at the age that I am now. It's very melodramatic, and Zach Braff works in the melodramatic. But that doesn't mean the melodramatic can't necessarily be successful, and that this film blends that line. What works about this movie is the cast. Having Florence Pugh in your movie is a huge plus. And she's wonderful in this movie. This is another just case of the character of Allison as played by Florence Pugh. This is a case of Florence Pugh just outshining and outperforming what the material asks of her. Kind of the same way she does it in Don't Worry Darling, where she gives a really great performance in a film that doesn't deserve that great of a performance. That's what Florence Pugh does, and she does it yet again with this character of Allison. You really just feel the sympathy for this character. You immediately have this emotional attachment to her. There's just something about the presence and aura that Florence Pugh has on screen where she's just magnetic to watch. Partner her with Daniel, played by Morgan Freeman in this movie, and you just have 2 very charismatic leads taking the forefront of this movie. And this relationship that Morgan Freeman and Florence Pugh have in this movie really works because it's not just a typical mentor younger person. There's this distrust because Morgan Freeman's character, to a degree, blames the character of Florence Pugh, Allison, for the death of his daughter. And so there is this anger, this pain, this heartbreak between these 2 and the shared trauma, and it's able to work in an effective degree. Zach Braff lays it on thick in this movie, and you can really feel, like I said, this melodramatic nature of it. It's very on the nose at times, especially with some of the drug use and certain scenes that happen in the 3rd act, which I'll talk about in a second. It does have this feeling of a PSA movie where it's like, don't do drugs. And Zach Braff can struggle with this. And specifically in the 3rd act, there's this weird choice revolving around the character of Daniel, his granddaughter, and Allison. It comes at the beginning of the 3rd act, and it threatens to derail the movie like entirely, where I'm like, oh God, any goodwill that this movie is about to just be completely lost. Luckily, Zach Braff doesn't just go with his worst tendencies, and he's able to pull back and restrain the film again. And with that restraint, allows the film to continue to succeed, even though this 10-minute scene, I was like, I'm about to lose it all. Anything good about this movie, it's gone. But like I said, when you have Florence Pugh, when you have when you have Morgan Freeman, when you do have a natural comedic timing that Zach Braff is able to achieve because he is a guy who's worked in comedy for quite a while, he's able to hit those beats. There is enough to recommend about this movie. I don't think it's anything particularly great, but watching this movie, I thought it was endearing to a degree that worked for me. And unlike The Son, which I just talked about, this movie, I didn't feel its emotional manipulation quite as much. I felt a more natural progression of this story, and it felt way more easier to connect to the humanity of this story. Thus, for all that, I can recommend A Good Person. Again, not a great film, but a good film. 3 stars out of 5. I've been talking a little positively recently. I need to stop. Let's just go. This is going to be my worst review right now. I will just say it right now. This is going to be the film out of all the 10 that I talk about today that I just hate. I hate this movie. I hate this movie starring Jack Harlow, a guy that cannot act. I don't know what Hollywood was thinking when they're like, we'll cast him in the role that Woody Harrelson made famous. The downgrade of going from Woody Harrelson to Jack Harlow is shocking. Harlow's not a good rapper, and he's a really exceptionally bad actor. This film also stars Cinquilla Walls, who I wouldn't necessarily call a great actor, just he looks so much better when compared to Jack Harlow. This is directed by Colmatic, who directed a film earlier this year called House Party, which I found to be but not terrible. This movie that I'm about to talk about makes House Party look like Casablanca. This movie is called White Men Can't Jump. Yes, the remake to the Wesley Snipes Woody Harrelson movie from the 90s. Here's the description of the movie. If you've seen White Men Can't Jump, you'll know the plot of this movie. But seemingly opposite street hoopers, Jeremy, an injury-prone former star, and Kamal, a has-been prodigy, team up to take one final shot at living out their dreams. Let me just say right now, I have no actual relationship to the movie White Men Can't Jump, except that I like Woody Harrelson and like Wesley Snipes. I've never seen the movie. So me going into this is not going to be a review of, oh my God, how could they bastardize this 90s classic beloved film that I have a powerful relationship with, that I love so dearly? How could they even think about remaking this? That is not the case of this review. The reason this movie sucks is because this movie sucks because Jack Harlow cannot act to save his life. This is the worst performance that I think I've seen on the big screen in quite a while. I just don't know what they're thinking. He has no charisma. Zero. Absolutely none. In fact, he has so little charisma that he actually takes away the charisma of other actors in this scene who look like they have better charisma than him, but standing next to him, he is like a vacuum for charisma. He sucks it all up and he keeps it for himself, and yet he can't let it out. I just don't understand what Jack Harlow is doing in this movie. Woody Harrelson is charisma king, and Jack Harlow should never be in the same sentence as Woody Harrelson, except for the one sentence, which is Jack Harlow sucks, and he sucks in comparison to Woody Harrelson. He is not funny, and this film asks him to be funny. This film asks him to be funny in a really big way, and every time he gets up to play, he misses. He swings, and it is a giant thud. He took a literal crap on screen, and it's so bad. I just don't understand anything about what he's even trying to accomplish in this. It literally looks like Harlow and the actor, which was Walls. I think Walls actually hates Harlow because there's zero chemistry between these two. I just watching this, I'm like, oh my God, who greenlit this idea and who saw these two actors together? Sorry, who saw this actor and this whatever the hell he is together and thought this was a good idea? The story is cliched. Every joke is predictable. There is no fun. There's no laughs. Every joke that is in this movie is the most broad, most easy joke you can think of. There's no creativity here. This is bad. I'm done talking about this film, but For Jack Harlow, you get something really special, probably like your last album sales and the reviews for your last album. I'm giving you a 0. This is god awful. I hated watching this film. You know, the only thing that I liked about this film is I like the sport of basketball and I like the NBA. And after watching this movie, I like the NBA and basketball just a little bit less. I now found myself, I'm like, maybe I should turn my life to hockey. Because Jack Harlow, if you like this sport, if you like the NBA, then I feel embarrassed to like the NBA as well. My God, never, ever act again. For the love of God. For the love of God, I just work on your rap career, which isn't good, but maybe you'll get another Lil Nas X feature and you'll have like 5 good lines in that, and that will be your legacy. Prove me wrong, but you're not a good actor. 0 out of 5 stars for White Men Can't Jump. Okay, after that, I guess this next movie that I'm going to talk about, which I am also fairly critical of and have already had many publicized thoughts about, this movie is actually going to just feel and be a lot better than whatever the hell I just talked about with White Men Can't Jump. I am talking, of course, about the notorious movie, The Little Mermaid, another Disney live-action remake. Like White Men Can't Jump, did we really need a retelling of The Little Mermaid? This film is directed by Rob Marshall, who has previously directed other Disney films such as Mary Poppins Returns and Into the Woods. This film stars Halle Berry, Jonah Haver-King, Daveed Diggs, Awkwafina, Jacob Tremblay, Javier Bardem, and Melissa McCarthy as Ursula. For those who do not know the plot of The Little Mermaid, I'll just explain it real quick, even though I know everyone who's watching this knows the plot of The Little Mermaid. But regardless, Ariel, a mermaid/princess of the sea, longs to see the surface world, but her father, King Triton, refuses. When Ariel makes a deal with Ursula, a sea witch, she gets her wish to be human. But if she does not experience love's first kiss, she will be enslaved forever by Ursula. And I've had a lot of really public thoughts about my disliking of these Disney live action films. So going into this movie, I was a little just, I wouldn't even say scared, but hesitant to go into this movie. I didn't really want to see this movie. But I decided I'm going to go, let's go see it. I review everything. I had heard enough positive about this movie that I thought maybe this one will be different. And walking out of this movie, I'm like, no, it's not really different, but at least I enjoyed good chunks of this movie. Let me say what works about this movie, and that's Halle Bailey. She is electric in this movie, legitimately. She is an excellent singer. Her numbers are really good. Now, do I like how her numbers, like Part of Your World, are directed? Not really, but her voice is kind of undeniable. And she has this really magnetic chemistry with Jonah Haver-King, who plays Prince Eric. They really work together. And for a large part of this film, if you know the Little Mermaid story, you know that Ariel doesn't have her voice. And thus, Bailey has to be a lot more communicative through her. I know I messed up that word twice. Ignore me. Bailey has to be a lot more just expressive in her face, is what I'm trying to say. And she is pretty wonderful in this scene, especially when she loses her voice. You really just feel the chemistry with no words. And it's a really powerful thing to translate from the screen to the audience, that you actually believe this chemistry and this romance and these two characters fall in love. And when this movie is largely a love story, that does give the film a lot of credibility to work. Also in this film, I found Melissa McCarthy to actually be quite a strong Ursula. I think she is the best adaptation of animated to live action that they bring in this movie, where I liked the look, I liked her musical number, I liked her lair. All of that Ursula stuff in this movie really worked, and I found Melissa McCarthy's performance to actually uplift this movie as well. So I like the villain and I like the heroes. That's a good start for this film. I also thought the CGI was so widely criticized before the movie. This film looks bright and colorful. At least this film has color to it. It's one of the more colorful looking live action retellings that we've had, where this one doesn't just look grayed out and boring and dusty. This one actually has like blues and greens and pinks. Like you're like, oh, okay. There is actually color on the screen that makes it more enjoyable to watch. With me saying that, that's still not necessarily a fair thing, because now I'm about to compare it to the animated film, which I don't necessarily want to do, but this film literally requires you to do it because these films exist together, because that's how Disney has decided to do it. And the issue is, while I did talk about how there is some color to this film, it's still nowhere near as lively when compared to the cartoon. The literal live action transformation of characters like Sebastian the crab or Flounder the fish, it's so interesting. They look like real fish and real crabs, and they just don't look particularly fun. Same with the sea. For a lot of sections of the sea, it's really too dark to see what's going on. I mean, underwater, they try to capture this effect of like, oh, this is what it would look like. And it's like, yeah, it looks really dark and it's really hard to see anything. And that's not really cinematic when you can't see your characters underwater, or you can't see the fish swimming around or the turtles. There is just this feature of this movie where it's a little just toned down for my personal liking. Daveed Diggs, Awkwafina, and Javier Bardem are also just checked out making this movie. I thought them as performers were just kind of lazy. I liked Daveed Diggs specifically a lot, and I just found his musical numbers really boring. Just, they weren't bad. He's a talented enough singer, but I didn't feel any passion. I didn't feel any fun with it. It really did feel like they were asking Daveed Diggs to do karaoke. And it didn't make for a particularly fun way to watch this movie. And you mix that with the realistic special effects created something so unengaging, I should say. Because you had Daveed Diggs kind of feeling like he's doing karaoke, partnered with this crab that looks like an actual crab. And it just looks boring, and it sounds boring. And it's almost as if this film is afraid to have something of a personality. And I think this is largely due to the failure of this film as directed by Rob Marshall, who's the biggest criticism I have of this film, where Rob Marshall struggles to make this film look cinematic. The shot composures are flat in this movie. The musical numbers are low energy. He struggles to incorporate the special effects with real life effects or the individuals, and it makes this film feel like it was filmed on a soundstage. You really do feel like this film is not natural. And it's a really hard thing to do in this movie, is to make this film feel natural in the style that Disney is asking Rob Marshall to direct this, because we know this is how Disney has been making these live action movies. They make the animals look real. They want to have a realistic look to this movie, and that's how they're going to explain themselves differently than the cartoons, because if this film looks more like a cartoon, then why aren't you just watching the cartoon? You have to make it look like a live action. But the problem with making it look like a live action is animals aren't expressive, and thus this film is nowhere near as expressive and artful as the cartoon version, which is just a lot more fun to watch. And it's the biggest fault of this movie, besides Rob Marshall, is the Little Mermaid's mere existence shouldn't be. The Little Mermaid as a live action film shouldn't be, because everything that this movie does well, as much as I just complimented Haley Bailey, the actor who played Prince Eric, Melissa McCarthy, while they're well done and they have some really good chemistry and there's some really wonderful stuff that they do in this movie, it was all done better in the animated film. It was all done better in the cartoon. And everything that is added to this film feels insignificant, because we know where the story is going. We know the beats that the story will have to hit. And we know what a well-paced, well-written movie like this would look like, because we have the original cartoon version, which comes in at like 90 minutes, compared to this movie, which is 2 hours and 20 minutes. So thus, you know what a sand-down version of this movie would look like, and it's a better movie. Now, with that all said, I went really hard on this movie, and I don't want to go that hard, because this movie is actually not as offensive as other Disney movies have been. Other of these Disney live-action movies are. I didn't find this film particularly offensive in any way. I actually enjoyed watching this film to some degree. They're certainly fun to be had. There is a few good action sequences. There is specifically scenes with ships involving Prince Eric. The Prince Eric character feels a little bit more fleshed out. The actor, specifically Bailey, and King do enough to keep you engaged in it. The new additions, while they add nothing, also don't do anything to derail the movie, as other live action Disney films have done. And it's also just the case of, and maybe I'm giving this too much credit, but I just haven't seen the original cartoon in maybe since I was a kid, maybe since I was like 8. Thus, while I know the story of The Little Mermaid, I can't say that I know the film's inside and out. It's not like I have every plot beat memorized. And thus, when watching the film, I haven't watched it to death. I know some of the songs, but I don't remember a lot of the story beats. Thus, I'm actually kind of engaged with it because I'm like, okay, I don't actually fully remember what happens here. Or I don't know this scene, or what is this? Like, there's just enough of the story. Like, for instance, the end scene, the famous one, where Ursula turns big and she's fighting Prince Eric and Ariel. I didn't remember that. And that was kind of fun to experience. So it is just maybe also the case where some of the ones that I found more offensive, like The Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, Peter Pan, those are stories that I know so well. This is not a story that I know so well. So at the end of the day, I had fun watching this movie, and I found aspects of this film to be very charming. And it is a needless remake, but I had fun watching this needless remake. And that's almost enough to just give this film a pass. And I will say, the kids in my theater loved this movie. They were going wild for this movie. They loved everything about it. I was kind of shocked at 2 hours and 20 minutes that they were able to sit through it and enjoy it. And yes, this film does go on too long, and it does go on too long for kids even, where you really did start feeling some of that energy in the last 40 minutes, where you just start hearing some of the kids crying out or just getting a little bored or yawning or like falling asleep. Like, you did hear that, but for the most part, when the film ends, they're all like cheering, screaming. They're all singing along with the movie. This film is a huge success because it does know its target demographic, which is children and the parents of those children who also grew up with The Little Mermaid. I can't say I necessarily had the greatest time watching this movie, but for a date night that I went with my girlfriend, she really enjoyed it. I had fun watching this movie with her, and it was certainly in no terms anywhere near as bad as a Peter Pan and Wendy. There is a lot to like about this movie. It's just the needless remake of this movie and the cynicism that I have towards those Disney live action movies didn't work for me. But overall, can recommend this film, even if it's a soft recommend. I'm giving it 2.5 out of 5 stars, leaning positive, but not highly positive. And then finally, let's talk about my last film that I wanted to talk about today. And I should just note for this last review that I'm going to do, hang on real quick. So this last film that I'm going to talk about, I'm not actually going to do necessarily a clear-cut review, what works, what doesn't work about this movie. I'm actually going to talk about more of the subject matter and the relationship that I have with this actor and watching this. This is a documentary that just came out to Apple TV, starring one of my favorite actors of all time, so one of my favorite screen presence of all time. The documentary is called Still, a Michael J. Fox movie. This film follows Michael J. Fox as an actor, learning that he has Parkinson's, and then where he goes from there. Michael J. Fox is maybe one of my favorite screen presences to ever just grace the big screen. Back to the Future is my favorite film ever made. I base a lot of my personality and my pop culture references and everything that I kind of just like was fundamental into my growing up on Michael J. Fox. Even the way sometimes I move or I find myself holding my body, or the way I even wear like a denim jacket. I think of myself as Marty McFly. Like, you don't understand the hold that this guy had on my childhood. I saw everything. I saw Back to the Future 1 through 3. I saw Family Ties. I saw Spin City. I saw the Michael J. Fox NBC show that released in like 2012. Secret of My Success, Teen Wolf, Doc Hollywood, Mars Attack, The American President, all these movies. I loved and adore Michael J. Fox. This guy's such a fundamental person in my childhood, and especially as a guy who loves movies. This guy was Marty McFly. He was like Luke Skywalker to me. This guy was so untouchable. When I was 16 or 17, I think I was 17, I dressed up as Marty McFly. I was so proud of how good my costume looked. And so watching this movie is watching a guy that I adore. and somebody whose story I did know the Parkinson's. I knew about the Michael J. Fox Foundation, which is something that I wrote about in high school and college. Like, this is a guy that I have a lot of admiration for. And what I loved about this movie is that it's Michael J. Fox's story in his own words. Now, this documentary is not necessarily one where at the end of it, I'm like, oh, I have a new understanding of Michael J. Fox, or I have a new understanding of even his story. Everything that's talked about in this movie, I've either knew about him or I had heard about him from his own interviews, from Letterman, Leno, Conan, whoever he was being interviewed by. So there wasn't anything of this film that I found particularly groundbreaking and new, something that I learned about Michael J. Fox. But what this documentary does so well is you learn about the spirit and energy of Michael J. Fox. And this idea of still, this guy who one cannot sit still, obviously, for his Parkinson, but also if he didn't have Parkinson's, he would not be able to sit still. This guy is kind of just a charisma overload, just with the way he moves. And like I said, I base it off even the way I'm moving right now, I feel like to some degree, that's me at the age of 10 watching Spin City and just being so charmed by him and just wanting to be like when I'm talking to, girls in high school, like just wanting to be Marty McFly, wanting to be his character from Spin City, which is his character. What is his character's name in Spin City? Mike Flaherty. Just wanting to be Mike Flaherty, wanting to be Marty McFly, wanting to be Alex P. Keaton, all these guys. He was the ultimate definition of cool. So when we're watching this movie, learning about him, it's just what makes Michael J. Fox Michael J. Fox, what makes him so unique compared to everyone else. And it's learning the story, and it's learning how he's making family ties, how he gets discovered, how this interplays with his life, how to some degree he even understands what's coming, how this has affected him, all this. It's him telling his story in his own words at a time when he can still tell the story. Because as you can tell from the documentary, and as you can tell that interviews he has done, the Parkinson is progressing, and it's getting harder and harder for him to talk. So to get him to tell this story as he wanted it to tell it, there was something really powerful about it. This film is directed by Davis Guggenheim, who has directed other documentaries, including Waiting for Superman, He Named Me Malala, and most famously, An Inconvenient Truth. There is, like I said, just such an energy to watching this guy. And even, after all the diagnosis, after all the just struggles with Parkinson, the alcoholism that then consumed him post his just diagnosis. He gets diagnosed at the age of 30. He's now 61 years old. And there is this tragedy to him, but he doesn't want his life to be a tragedy. He wants you to understand what it is to be Michael J. Fox and what that is, and how this disease of Parkinson's is so crippling to him, but how that also doesn't define him. And there is a real power and beauty to this Michael J. Fox story, especially when it deals with Tracy Pollan, who plays his wife. They've been married since 1988, which I believe that means they've been together for 33 years married, plus however many years they were dating. I believe they met on Family Ties. Like I said, it all just works in a way that I didn't learn anything really new about this documentary, but it was Michael J. Fox. It was my hero, my guy, just talking about his life. And I loved it. And I found it just so moving, and just, it was something really special. It was like watching a guy get interviewed and be honest for an hour and a half, like if he was on Letterman or something like that. That's what this felt like. I really enjoyed it. This film uses, this documentary uses this really cool effect where we see this actor from behind that's supposed to be a young Michael J. Fox. And they use him really prevalently, and it's one of my favorite scenes in this documentary, where you see this actor from behind, and it's during this period where he's working on Family Ties in the morning, and then at night he'd go to Robert Zemeckis' set to film Back to the Future. He's getting like 3 hours of sleep each night for 4 months. And you see this guy, he comes out from behind, and then he runs onto the soundstage, and then we get Alex P. Keaton up on the screen doing his lines, defining the story of Michael J. Fox as he understands it at that moment. Then we cut to him running, and now he's Marty McFly and all there. And it kind of blends this all together in a really smooth, transitional way. And they use the clips of his movies, his art form to describe his life, the hard points, the moments. Like there's literal like archival scenes brought out from these movies or moments from these iconic movies that are used to define and give language to a disease that you don't understand that unless you have it. Something that I've watched people, lose their life to, struggle with today, all of that. And it just kind of gives language and a way of understanding it that someone like me who hasn't experienced it directly now can empathize and understand it more and feel this like tinge of like sadness now looking at how his art is now like obviously so tied with Michael J. Fox and, the hardships of his life. In particular, Spin City, which is one of my favorite comedy shows ever, a show that I watched all 6 seasons of even after he left, just because I like that cast so much. Even when watching that, the clips from Spin City in this, you understand like how hard that is for him to be there. The fact that he's talking about how he's always moving or he's fidgeting in the show to kind of control his Parkinson's in a way that he can control it. And then like seeing that, how right before that period, he's being kind of consumed by alcoholism, this fear of like going out there on Spin City, announcing that he has Parkinson's, all of that. And just, it adds a really bittersweet feeling when watching Spin City where you're like, oh, I love the show. And it's also really hard to know how this guy that I love on Spin City is struggling in these moments and how that's kind of based, how he's bringing that into his art form as a performer. I found it all really fascinating. It's this perfect blend of vanity project to some degree, while also being a story about this guy, a story for something larger like Parkinson, but also just being a reflection on this incredible actor and what makes him so incredible. And I really appreciate it still a Michael J. Fox movie. Again, not a movie where you sit there and you learn much about him, but you feel the essence of Michael J. Fox. Really impressive work here. I'm giving it 4 out of 5 stars here on the Beneverse movie channel. And that's all 10 movies. Those are the 10 movies that I watched in May. I'll be clipping these up in segments so you don't have to watch all 10. You can watch them one by one, whatever ones you want to watch, whatever ones you don't. Whatever happens and whatever you decide to do. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you all so much for watching. Take care and bye-bye.